events are going to look like. And I think that for a lot of you guys, who's been to semifinals before? So several of you guys, and who's been to did we go to nationals last year? No. Okay.
Well, team racing is technically
match racing went to nationals. Oh wait.
match racing went to nationals.
And team racing. Okay.
I mean, it's kind of like automatically nationals, yeah.
Cool. So I think that, as we head into the next couple of months, definitely the idea is that our strategy and practices, our focus and practices is going to shift a lot. And I think it's really important for everybody to kind of know where we're headed and to be on the same page so that we get as much out of these practices as possible. So with that in mind, I want to talk about nationals. So has anybody looked at the scores for nationals for the last couple of years at all? And what do the top 5 teams, what do the score lines look like?
Yale's got a picket fence.
Yale's got a picket fence? Okay, sort of. What else? Somebody take a guess. What does it take to win nationals? Consistency. So what kind of consistency? How consistent do you have to be?
Under top. Very.
What's that?
Under top 8.
Under top 8? Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, so I'll tell you exactly what it takes. In order to win nationals, Yale last year averaged 5.1 over 36 races. Okay, so that's between A division and B division. They averaged a 5.1. They had a lot of races where they were, 1, 2, 3, 4. They had, they had a 15, 14, 13, 12, 12. Those were the only scores outside of the top 10. 5 scores outside of the top 10. So that's to win the regatta. Okay? Then there's a big jump to second. And between second and 10th, the second place team averaged a 7. The 10th place team averaged 9.4. And the 9th place team actually averaged like an 8.5-ish, I think. So that is to say that between 2nd and 10th, the point spread was really, really close. And it really came down to, a good way to think about it, I think, is that if you could pick off one more vote than anybody else in every race, that moved you from 10th to 5th, or to 2nd, rather. Really important to think about it in those terms, right? So that delta of can we move forward in the fleet was super, super important. And I was just a second ago briefly counting the number of top 10s that each team got, and I think that this is a rough estimate, and you guys can go home and kind of look at the scores for yourself, but in order to be in the top 5, in order to be in the top 10 solidly, if you had half of the races inside of the top 10, you were top 10. So that's only half of the races inside of the top 10, and you would be better than Stanford finished last year. Okay, so I think that that's a really important thing to think about also. That means that if you go out there and you round the top mark in 13th, and you pass one vote at the top mark, and you pass one vote at the leeward mark, and you pass one vote between the next 2 legs of the course, you would be in the top 10 probably, right? With the 13th rounding at the top, and then you can pick away 3 votes over the course of the race, you're looking solid. So I think that, there's a couple of aspects to this, but the biggest thing is that for any of these teams, there's probably going to be kind of 3 types of races that they have. There's going to be a race between 1st and, let's say, 7th, where if you're finishing first through seventh, what does your race look like? What do you think? Pretty perfect. So what do you mean by that? Good start. Yeah, you come off the line clean. Perfect tax, maybe. I would say good composition to your beat. So you come off the line clean. You take your tacks in the right spot. They don't have to be the best tacks, but they're top 15 in a fleet of 20. Everybody's going to have good bow handling. And you don't do anything crazy, and you stay in that front row, right? If you stay in the front row, probably going to come around the top mark in the top 9 or 10, and then if you can pick away a couple of votes, you're 1 through 7. Okay, so let's say that the next tier of races is kind of between 8 and 15 here. What does an 8 to 15 race look like?
Not winning the start.
Yeah, not winning the start, right? Probably coming off the line, and maybe you can hang for a minute, but you get shot out eventually, or maybe you win the start at the unfavored end, or maybe you're second row and you bail out and you get to clear air right away, but you're already second row and you're digging back at that point, right? And then what? How about the first beat? What does the first beat look like? Looking for clear air. Sure, yeah. Maybe if it's an oscillating breeze and it's really important to stay in phase, we're looking for clear air, but we know that we're never going to get to clear air, so we're kind of taking those lanes that we deserve up that first beat and trying not to lose boats, but we're not really in a position to pick through boats. We're just letting people fall behind us because they're sailing out of phase, trying to get to clear air that they're never going to get to, right? So that's kind of the second tier. And then what does the third tier look like? The third tier is, maybe it's, there's some overlap in these, but maybe it's more like a 13 to 20 finish or something like that. What does that race look like?
Second row start.
Second row start, for sure. Out of phase, kind of other people are dictating your race, right? Yeah.
Maybe you foul.
Maybe you foul, yeah, maybe you do something stupid, right? Maybe you foul, maybe you're over, maybe you get kelped, maybe you capsize, right? Like something bad happens and you finish 20. And I think that the big difference between the teams in the top 10 and the teams in the bottom 10 is that the teams in the top 10 are the teams who, in each of these tiers, everybody's going to have races in all of these tiers, right? Here, the second place team, Coast Guard, in this regatta, had an 18, a 16, an 18, a 16, and another 16. So they had 5 races worse than 16. But that's okay, because when they had those deep races, they weren't 20. Right? They beat 2 boats or they beat 4 boats. And that's not great. If they could have, in those, battled from, instead of 16 up to 13, that would have been huge, right? That would have gotten them a lot closer to Yale. That would have gotten BC a lot closer to Coast Guard. When we're talking about that 1-point average, really the big difference, I think, between the top teams and everybody else is that the top teams are constantly going to be moving towards this side of the spectrum on each of these tiers, right? So it's not that they're not going to have any races that they were second row off the start, or that something crazy happened. They're going to have those races, but in those races, they're still going to be picking away boats. They're still going to be moving forwards, and they're going to be finishing closer to this side of the range than to this side of the range. Sound good? So, I think that the biggest difference when you look at the scores between the top, especially the top couple of teams, the top, let's say the top 3 teams, and everybody else, is they have a lot more races in this tier than in this one or than in this one. So what's the difference between those teams and everybody else? how do you finish more in this tier than in these two? You make less mistakes. And how do you make less mistakes?
Practice really, really hard.
Sure, yeah, you practice really, really hard. And I think that in particular, you practice executing, right? You practice the big places that are going to separate this from this are the start, obviously, right? So making sure that coming off the starting line, we have a good acceleration move, and that defending our hole before we do our acceleration move, we're constantly making space, so that we can have that nice, easy acceleration move. There's big items that if we do the big things well, we're going to have more races here. And this is where I think that this team in particular can excel, right? It's getting off the line clean and going fast right away. It's coming into that windward mark and really executing in those tight situations where, coming into the windward mark, we've got, let's say we're here, and we've got boats up here on the ley line already, and having the correct tactics when we're this boat and we're not laying, that's going to get us around this mark without putting up the big points, right? It's those big things that we always talk about being a huge component of the race that's going to put you in this tier. And I think that, that's something that we can practice without any other teams. That we can go out and we can work on boat handling by ourselves. We can work on especially starting skills by ourselves. And if we can just get off the line, that's going to be a huge portion of more races in this tier than in this tier, right? That single thing is massive. So then how about the difference between here and here? And I think this is a little bit harder, but also going to be maybe more important. So what's the difference between being in this tier and being in this tier?
I'd say, like you said, like you're always looking forward to, like you get 20th, like you give up, so, or if you're like 13th, you don't really care, but like the fact that those good teams are like, they accept where they are, but they're just going to keep trying to grind another boat.
Totally. Always pushing forward, I think, is the big thing. And especially when we're at nationals in that 20-boat fleet, where every team is there because they qualified in their region, they qualified at semifinals, and now, we're left with this really good high-level fleet who can all boat handle, they can all go fast, they all know tactics, they all have all the parts of the game. Moving forwards is hard, right? Everybody's trying to move forwards all the time. And to me, I've talked to you guys about this before a couple of times, I think, but when I watch East Coast racing versus West Coast racing, it's really interesting. I always use this example because there was a regatta a couple of years ago when I was in school, and West Coast teams would go back to the East Coast and just get hammered, get crushed at every regatta by the East Coast teams. And then a bunch of East Coast teams came out here for a couple of regattas, for the Rose Bowl and for it was one of the regattas in Santa Barbara. And all of a sudden, all the West Coast teams could hold their own. And I think that there are several reasons for that. But one of the big things that I believe the East Coast teams do better than us, that they have an advantage inherent in the differences between the programs, is that they're always sailing against a big fleet and they're always sailing against a deep fleet, and so just because of that, they learn, and this is the skill that they're learning where to position their boat to live. So if they get off the line in that second row start, and they have these two boats coming across on starboard, and maybe they know that there is this little bit of right phase, and so they need to get onto starboard to stay lifted. If this is a West Coast boat, they're going to tack down here, shy of these boats, give themselves a nice big lane, and maybe be in this guy's bad air or something like that. But regardless, they're not going to be, they're going to pick the easy lane, or they're going to sail through and look for clear air over here and then tack, and then these guys are going to be leading them into the next shift, into this lefty. Whereas if this is an East Coast boat, they pick their perfect lane right here, and they know exactly how far they can go towards these guys and not be affected by their air, and how close to this guy they can go and not be affected by their air. And I think that they're better at picking these slippery little positions in this lane you deserve situation. And so I think that one of the big focuses for us as we approach this end of the year and we're thinking about, how do we excel at nationals, is we need to be thinking about how do we spend more of our races in this tier, and when we're in this tier, because we will be, everybody will be, how do we get closer and closer to picking this correct position as opposed to picking this position or picking this position, and either bleeding boats here or being led back into the next shift here. And so there's two topics that I want to touch on tonight, and one of them is that we're going to start moving away from that focus on boat handling and on boat speed and on sailing the boat, because I think that we've seen tremendous improvement this year. Like I'm blown away at the improvement from when I saw you guys last to when I watched you guys on Thursday this past week. And it's awesome. It's really, really good. And I think that, the thing that I was most impressed by was that you guys all sailed out and started doing around the mark without tacking as soon as we got on the water. And then we went out, and when we did that mini race series, you guys just crushed the Youth Foundation kids, which has never happened in past years, as far as I can remember, like it did on Thursday, and I think that a lot of that was that you guys were consistently getting off the line. You were consistently, 1 through 7 at that top mark, and that's huge. That's massive. I think that as we stop focusing on that boat handling, it's really important for you guys individually to keep pushing, to keep, when you have the opportunities in practice, to really be disciplined about forcing yourselves, forcing your teammates to be better and better at boat handling. And the idea that I want to leave you with here in terms of boat handling, like kind of my final word on boat handling this season, is there is a right answer. And you'll hear people say that there's different styles that work, and that's true. That if you look at the top 5 boats at nationals, the top 5 all have boat handling that works. It's good enough. And right now I think that many of us have boat handling that works. It's good enough, but it's only good enough if you're the best at this. And I think that our advantage that we can have going into nationals is not that we're going to be the best at this. We can be good at this, but we can't be the best at this. We can be the best at boat handling. And we can be the best at getting off the line and having the best accelerations and being the best at fighting for our hole on the line. Like, those are things that realistically we can be the best at. And so, I encourage you to keep pushing to be better and better and better, to think about what is the right answer. So what I mean by that is, for example, in tacks, something like a big discussion is, if you look at the top boats, some people are going to have these big, flashy roll tacks where they're snapping the boat really hard and pulling the rig through the air really fast. And some people are going to have smooth boat handling that's, not quite as aggressive. And it'll all work, but the physical reality of the situation is that the faster you can pull the mast through the air without losing flow on the rig, the faster you're going to come out of that tack. And there's no arguing with that. Sure, smooth is good because it allows you to maintain flow over the rig. If you're being jerky and fast, then you can't maintain flow over the rig. But if you can pull the rig through the air faster and not lose flow, that's faster every time. So think about what are the objective realities of like the physics that's going on here, right? And really try to figure out how do you get that little tiny bit extra out of your boat handling, because that's where you guys are going to excel. Where other teams are going to say, okay, good enough, now let's focus on this other stuff. And so with that in mind, I wanted to spend a little time talking about tactics and strategy, because I think that sort of the next step and the big focus